Thank you for your time. The questions I am going to ask were formed by a group of Chicago teens who are interested in addressing and starting a dialogue about topics most important to our peers, neighborhood, community, Chicago, and etc. We are still in the process of gathering feedback related to some of our questionnaire topics, and your answers and opinions are very important parts of this process. At the end of this survey, please give us a feedback on how to improve this process for future interviews and suggest questions that you would like us to ask about your community. Okay, please state your name and your relationship to me.
Sherry Monique. I'm a former teacher of Tashara.
Okay. Where are you from?
I'm originally from North Carolina, but I grew up in Indiana.
Which neighborhood are you in Chicago?
So I'm currently in Bridgeport. Mm,
How long have you lived in Chicago?
oh my, reveal my age. Let's just say for over 20 years.
Okay. What role do you play in your community?
Um, I'm really just a good, quiet neighbor in my community.
What is your definition of community?
My definition of community is one that we're people who live in the community, they really do show like interactions with each other. In my former community in McKinley Park, I lived on a block where all of the kids played with each other outside from like during the summer, all day to like all night. And it was just great to always see the kids, playing together. Um, we came out and talked to each other. Where I live currently, like we don't quite have that interaction or that communication with, or I don't have that interaction communication with my neighbors. But I just feel like a community are those people that, come together, interact, support each other.
Right. How have you been impacted by your community?
Um, so I realize like in the current community that I'm in, it's quieter. It's definitely more reserved. Um, you know, I tend to tell my kids to be a little more quiet, because they're kids. They want to be loud. But I can let my kids kind of walk a couple of blocks and go to the park and things like that.
So it's not the worst neighborhood.
Right.
Right. How would your life be different if you lived in a different city or town?
Well, growing up in Indiana, in a small town that I grew up in, I thank God that I live in Chicago because I feel like sometimes the smaller towns are just a little more narrow minded,
Yeah.
a little more, provincial in their ways.
If you could change anything about your community, what would it be?
Um, so my community is made up of a lot of police officers and firefighters,
Mm-hmm.
and I do see the signs of Blue Lives Matter. I feel like if there could be a combination of blue lives, black lives, all lives matter kind of a display.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like there's kind of this it's me against them
Right,
kind of
divide.
mindset, right? And I just feel like if there was more of an interaction where there was a respect for both sides of the issue.
Okay. How do you think your community is viewed by others?
So I do know that there are people of the African American race. When I tell them I live in Bridgeport, they'll say, "Ooh, I know I can't come visit you," and that's sad. That is so sad to think that people I either work with or people that I socialize with feel that way. Um, Otherwise, the community is seen because there's mostly firefighters, teachers, police officers. These are your union workers. These are the people working for the city of Chicago. So people take pride in that.
If, if you think this view is wrong or unfair, is there a way to change how your community is viewed by others?
So it would just take more like communication amongst groups, like more like meetings with different groups and making that public and being able to kind of air out issues and opinions and
Talk about it freely.
hmm
All cities have to deal with issues like violence. How does the issue of violence in Chicago compare to other major cities?
well, Recently, it feels like there's been some level of control with the violence. You don't quite get the shocking news stories on a daily basis of, multiple shootings or injured people or even deaths. You kind of think about Baltimore, like you kind of felt, kind of sympathy for Baltimore, what they were going through, and then kind of go through it in Chicago for the past couple of years. It to me sometimes it doesn't feel like as intense as I think others may kind of feel about it, but I do know it exists.
What are the top 3 issues/concerns that you would like to address and start a dialogue with your community?
Definitely jobs. I think if there were more jobs available, I think people would feel a little more upbeat and feel a little more, positive about living in Chicago. Education is always a priority, but that's a huge dialogue. Like, what does public education look like for Chicago? How do we make these schools a real community center for our students where they feel like this is a haven for them, like this is where they can come and flourish as a human being. Like I would like to see students take more pride in who they are as a Chicago public school student. And then the third issue, I feel like the city does a really good job with the public parks programs that they offer. But just maybe kind of expanding those programs and making more programs or more facilities available for young people.
Finally, how do you see Chicago in the future? Is it good or bad? Can it be prevented?
So I've fallen in love with Chicago since I was in 6th grade. Like, my dream was to live in the city, and of course I thought I was going to live downtown. So I always feel like Chicago is going to come out on top, like be this beacon of a urban, landscape that's just where people want to live. And I feel like we keep getting closer and closer to that ideal that I have. And again, it's just with everything in life. You always kind of have to renovate, renew it, and keep going back over and figuring out like what's working, what's not working.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any questions that I did not ask you that you feel I should ask others in your community?
No, I think you did a very thorough job of your list of questions.
Thank you.